Will feature prominently in today's class. But before we get to tennis, let's open with a prayer, and then I'll make some more introductory remarks. There's a prayer at the top of the screen. I can make that a little bit bigger. Let's make that a little bigger. Bigger. And it's also at the top of your handout. Let's pray that prayer out loud together. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, who settest the solitary in families, we commend to thy continual care the homes in which thy people dwell. Put far from them, we beseech thee, every root of bitterness, the desire of vainglory, and the pride of life. Fill them with faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, godliness. Knit together in constant affection those who, in holy wedlock, have been made one flesh. Turn the hearts of the parents to the children, and the hearts of the children to the parents, and so enkindle fervent charity among us all, that we may evermore be kindly affectioned one to another through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I love that prayer. It's a prayer from the prayer book. I love praying that we might be kindly affectioned one to another. There are extra handouts by the coffee pot if you would like one. Handouts by the coffee pot. And again, if you've just walked in, if you would benefit from a hearing assist device, they're also back there by the coffee pot. So we're doing something a little different. It's a 3-week series, not very long, but we are going to read 2 fables each week and ask some questions about how these fables might intersect our lives. Some of them are pretty close to home. Others of them you'll read and be like, oh, I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. I predict that today's fables get really close to the mark. They feel like something that all of us has to deal with. And when I introduced today's class last week, there was a good bit of chuckling in the room because I don't know about you, but there are a lot of people in my life that I love that I want to do what I want them to do. And by golly, they just don't seem to want to do what I want them to do. And the question is, what am I going to do about that? Last week, we looked at what's called the failure of syntax. These are not my titles. These are the titles given by Edwin Friedman to different sections of his book of Fables. Last week, we looked at how communication and the breakdown in communication sometimes gets in our way. This week, we're going to look at demons of resistance, and next week, we're going to look at bonds and binds. There's a 4th section in his book that we're going to skip this series, but maybe we'll come back to it another time. Again, handouts in the back. Because we're going to read stories that are under copyright, I'm not going to pass them out to you, but I'm going to let you look over my shoulder as I read them on the screen, and I'll ask some folks to read them. Would you be willing to read for us, James? Is that what you're saying? Thank you. And who might read the second part of the story? Thank you. Right behind you, Tammy. James? Tammy, would you raise your hand again? So let's start with the first story, and then we'll hear about it. This story is called Net Results. Go ahead.
All right, this is Net Results. One day, Harry decided to improve his wife's tennis game. Not that she cared that much. First, he found opportunities for her to learn. She never did. Next, he sent her to all the pros, but she did not progress. He bought her the latest how-to books, tapes of the champs. Her game did not develop. He left magazine articles around in hopes that she would read them. Her game maintained consistent, though curiously, she seemed to make better contact with her backhand. As time went by, Harry's wife started to regress. She had more and more trouble getting up for it. Often she would become sick just before a trip. Sometimes she developed indefinite pains before a game. She fatigued easily. She began to withdraw. Then she hurt her arm. After failing to follow through, it took her a year to recover. When her arm got better, Harry decided to make a breakthrough. He would teach his wife himself. First, he bought her a brand new racket, taking special care to find one that was well-balanced, light, and with a grip that would not find painful, as she had often complained. He found shoes advertised not to make her feet sweat, something else she bothered her. Tennis shorts that were not too long and not too short, and socks that were not supposed to make her feet itch. He even bought balls with extra bounce, frowned upon by many, including himself. But if it would give her the shots more oomph, and she managed to find a court mysteriously missed by others, where they could play in seclusion and at such a time that was most convenient. His wife had often said that she did not like others watching, and that the hours in which they could usually reserve a court were not her best time of day. In the end, Harry had nullified in advance every reason his wife could ever have given why she did not distracted, seemed listless or out of shape. So one delightful morning, warm but not hot, with only the slightest cooling breeze, he took his wife out to the out-of-the-way court. She did not seem overly excited about the idea. In fact, she developed a slight headache, but she went. On the way over, Harry realized that she had taken her old racket and had forgotten to wear the new apparel that he bought her. As soon as they got out of the court, he walked his partner over to her position and reviewed with her how to stand, how to place her feet, how to bend her knees, how to hold her arms, her wrists, her elbows, all the pointers he had given over with the night before. Each time she silently allowed him to correct her stance, though once she did ask how long he thought they would be there. He went with her once again over how to hold the racket, how to anticipate a return, how to coordinate her timing, and then enthusiastically he ran back to his side of the court.
Thank you.
"Ready, dear?" he asked, and as soon as she nodded slightly, he softly hit a serve. It passed her unmolested. "What happened?" "I wasn't ready." He lobbed another. She barely moved, but managed awkwardly to reach out and hit it back. The ball bounded into the net. "What's the matter?" "Just not up to it today," she said half-heartedly. "I'm trying to help you, not hurt you." Okay, she said. "Go ahead." He was about to serve a third time when he noticed where she was standing. So he went back to her side of the net and positioned her once more. "Set?" he asked, and without waiting for a response, which was not going to come anyway, he hit another slightly harder than he intended. The ball bounced perfectly, however, almost homing in on her strings, and she returned the service. It zoomed off to her right, caroomed off an old wooden bench, and ricocheted around in the corner between the rusty green grated fence until it became caught in the diamonds of the mesh. Not wanting to discourage his wife, he shouted, "Good power! Try to follow through with a little more across your body." "Don't you think we should paint the house this year rather than next?" she asked. Thwack. Harry's next serve headed for outer space. His wife had caught it at the very middle of her tether and sent it screaming over his head, over the iron mesh fence, and beyond a large red maple on the other side. "You really can put a lot on it," he yelled. "Try again." Smash! It came right back, a real zinger this time, smack into the middle of the net, where it bounced a few times and died. "Good zip," Harry yelled. "Try angling it up a little. I think you've almost got it." Thus the volley continued. Harry would remind his wife how to stand, run over to her side of the court to demonstrate some principles of racket technique, run back to his side of the court to prepare for some dreamed-of reciprocity, initiate the dialogue with a clean, well-placed serve. And his wife would randomly send the ball its own willful way. "Don't you want to play?" he asked finally. She gave a slight shrug with her shoulders. "You don't seem interested." "Well, this was your idea, you know." "Yes, but it's for you. That is, us." Harry broke off. He knew, of course, that the game was more than skill or physical prowess. He was fully aware that playing well involved many emotional factors as well. self-control, for example, self-esteem, self-reliance. That playing well included the capacity to be assertive, yet regulate one's intensity. That at the bottom of success was the mental toughness to respond well to challenge, the capacity to deal with adversity, to recover under pressure and somehow to maintain a positive attitude, to be bold, to take risks, and to be optimistic. These attributes were not only necessary for playing well, they were also the lessons the game could teach. He decided, therefore, to be the kind of teacher who was sympathetic, neither too over-involved nor too critical, who was encouraging and who remained supportive no matter what. He resolved never to guilt her and always show he still loved her, despite her faults. For he wanted to feel valued, and after all, the ultimate end was not how she ranked, but fun. He decided on a new tack. She needs more guidance during the act itself, he thought. Harry served a high lob, underhanded, designed to bounce up right before her. Then he ran around to her side of the court, turned her shoulders in the right direction, held her arm with his hand, and guided the racket with just the right angle and speed to lob it back. He took off again, beat the ball to his side of the court, and lobbed it once again to hers, ran back behind her, held her arm just right, and guided the racket in a true path once more. Again, he started back to his side of the net, but it wasn't necessary. The ball had hit the racket wood and bounced aimlessly away. He tried his new approach once more, lobbed the ball, beat it to the other side, held her arm just right, and aimed the racket true. It crashed the net again. The next time, trying to correct for the previous fault, they sent it completely over the baseline, and a third time she wasn't ready, so that even together they missed making any contact at all. He stood at his end of the court, dumbfounded, reminding himself of his vows of patience. His wife stood at her end, wondering when she'd be out of the sun. What would it take to improve her game? He had taught her all the theory, all about technique. He had ensured the best surroundings, obtained the finest equipment. She possessed all the natural resources. Then suddenly, Harry stopped asking. Slowly, he began to walk in a little circle. He bounced the ball vigorously a few times, wiped his racket handle of any sweat, positioned himself properly for a serve, and then, after glancing slightly to his right and to his left, he hit it with all his might, not directly toward his wife, but up. Up and up it rose, and when it came down on her side, he was over there himself, ready for the return. Up he hit it toward his own side. He was back when it came down. Once more he batted the ball high into the blue so that he might have time to get under the return. So their match continued forever and a day, and never again did Harry let it bounce on her end of the court.
Thank you both. Who won? She did. We all think she did. Yeah. Yeah. Would somebody, Elizabeth, would you run the microphone around the room for me? Thank you. So the moral, I think Friedman wrote this, and he also wrote the discussion questions. They are not mine. But I think the moral that is identified for the story offers a little more nuance, perhaps. The unmotivated are notoriously invulnerable to insight. Isn't that true? Yeah. I won't ask for a show of hands, but if you've ever tried to teach someone a lesson, either a piano lesson or a golf lesson or a tennis lesson, if you've ever been a tutor, if you've ever worked with an art student, like how do you help the one who doesn't want to be there? Like, how do you help? Like, good luck with that, right? If you've ever had a student, if you're a professor or a teacher and you've ever had a student, like at some point you've got to let go of the need to tie your success to their success, right? So let's look at some of the discussion questions, just because it's fun to use the vehicle of the fable to explore through the language of the fable some of our own experience. Let's talk about Harry, the spouse. Why is it that Harry can't see his inability? Why is he what makes it impossible for Harry to notice that his efforts aren't working? Yeah, thank you, Tammy.
Because he's passionately involved in the process.
Yeah, Tammy says because he's passionately involved in the process. Yeah. Liz, behind you, Liz. Here comes that microphone.
I just think he's a very self-absorbed personality.
Huh.
It's all about him.
Yeah.
I don't look at it as he can be passionately involved in the process. I think that's probably true. But at some point as an adult, you need to think about somebody else by yourself.
So let me sit with you just for a minute, and maybe she doesn't want to answer, but he's trying so hard. I mean, he's responding to all of her needs. He's making sure that she has everything, but you're shaking your head saying he's not, right? Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny? Because he's cloaked his self-absorption in generosity and selflessness, right? Have you ever met someone who's convinced that they are helping you out when actually what they're really doing is trying to help themselves out? And isn't that where the problem lies? Yeah, James. I want to ask you if that's ever been you, because of course it has, right? It's always been us. Yeah, James.
It's almost like she doesn't really want to play. And
No.
you don't really are not motivated, no matter how good of a teacher you have.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So let's go a little deeper, right? Let's go a little deeper. What would it take to get the spouse, the wife, to say no? Like, what does it take? What has to happen in this system? Whether it's him or her or a guest or an angel appears in the bedroom the night before. Like, what makes it possible for her to say, I'm not playing tennis? Why doesn't she just say no? What has to happen to make that possible? Dream with me, Lark up front. Raise your hand high so the microphone can see you. Yep.
I think she wants to please him on the one hand.
Yeah.
I can only relate to my husband wanted me to get my gun, whatever, permit. He's a hunter, and he wanted me to do that. And so he showed me all about the gun, and then he took me to the shooting range where they shoot, and it was awful, absolutely awful. I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. I was scared of the gun. It was not. And so at one point I had to turn to him and say, I can't do this. I don't care about that license. I have you, and you have a gun. If you need, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it.
Well, if you're willing to share, why did you get all the way to the gun range before you said that?
Because I thought, that's his interest,
Yeah.
see, and I could, participate. He hunts, but I don't hunt.
Yeah.
I don't own a gun.
Yeah.
I don't want to own a gun.
Yeah. In a
So-
strange way, it's out of love, right? I don't want to let that person down. I want to do what they want to do.
Right.
But sometimes I don't want to do what they want to do. I want to find another way to do it, right? I'm not doing this
Right.
because I want to do it, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. Who else? Anybody else? What does it take for her to say no? Like, what has to shift or change? Here, right next to you, Judy.
Confidence in their relationship.
Yeah, confidence in the relationship. The kind of confidence that probably would manifest itself in his self-awareness. Right? I mean, right, if he could be honest and she could be honest, then wouldn't it be different, right? Yeah, but it's not just a conscious thing. Sometimes we're blocked by things beyond our consciousness. All right, to what extent, I'm asking question 7, to what extent is the net result due to his overfunctioning or her passivity, or how are both partners connected? So I want you to imagine that you're the marriage counselor who has presented this situation, right? And I bet, even if you've never been a marriage counselor, I bet you know that the right answer is not to blame one person, right? You've got to find a way to identify something that either party can do. So how would you define the mix of what's going on between his overfunctioning and her underfunctioning or her passivity? How would you identify the responsibility of both parties? Yeah. Brandy.
A lot of times I use what's called the pursuer. Of course, now I lost the word. Pursuer, and then the person who runs away, right? And if the pursuer will let up, the person who runs away will turn towards them. And I think that's why her backhand got better, because she wanted to turn towards him. But then he just continued to pursue and pursue so much that she just couldn't turn towards him.
Yeah, thank you. What else?
Sometimes when you explain those things, that does give them insight, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. What else? How else would you attribute responsibility to both parties? Alan?
So sometimes expectations, I think, come into play. I was told once expectations are pre-packaged resentments. I think each of them has an expectation of the relationship that's very different, and they're each pursuing that. The gun range, et cetera. This story went on for years. Remember, her arm hurt, and she had to. I think she expected the relationship that maybe the tennis would come to her, or it might, not be so bad. And he expected, well, quite bluntly, for her to play tennis with him.
Yeah, thank you. What else? Yeah, Elizabeth.
I think she needs help understanding that her happiness is important. No matter what he wants, she has to come to grip and learn to take up for herself and say no, not be afraid to make her happiness of importance and not just his.
Yeah, what, the fable, it goes, of course, to a ridiculous point, right? The end is ridiculous. What does the ridiculousness of the man playing tennis by himself, right? That's an absurd thing. But what does that tell us about how to find balance in the happiness of the relationship? What do we have to do sometimes? Yeah.
Well, that he should have been pursuing tennis all along and find his own community in which to play tennis and leave his wife alone.
Yeah.
My first reaction is, why are they even married? And then my second reaction is, they're both so clueless, probably they have to stay married in their own lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
But she's as culpable as he is, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absurd, but it's also, they both lack so much self-awareness. It's a little much.
Yeah, right, yes, yeah. Dean?
I think tennis is a good metaphor for the relationship. There's a give, like the serve, and the take of receiving. And at the end of it, it's just their relationship is exemplified by him trying to do both parts, whereas she's not a part of it. So there isn't a tennis game. It's just one guy out there hitting the ball. And there's not really a relationship because she's not a part of stating it.
Yeah. Let me skip to question number 9, because this is going to bring it, and this is in some ways maybe a response to Molly's good wondering about why a couple like this would ever be married and how ridiculous they are. So question number 9, when you see yourself locked in an over-functioning, under-functioning struggle, what's the best way to get out of it, whether you're the over-functioner or the under-functioner? And let me say, I would name that the most common struggle that people who come to me and say, I'm stuck, or I'm unhappy, or life is difficult, the most common struggle is an overfunctioner and an underfunctioner, right? Whether it's a parent-child or a spouse or any kind of relationship. And in my experience, it doesn't look so much like tennis as it looks like, I work really hard, so when I come home, I want to unplug. And yet the other spouse said, well, I need some help around here. Like, you can't just unplug. I know you work hard. And so how do you find the balance between an overfunctioner and an underfunctioner in whatever relationship in question? So if you're going to do something radical, if you're going to radically decouple or radically sort of unblock a relationship between someone who's always overfunctioning and someone who just can't quite seem to get with it, an underfunctioner. What are the ways to get out of that? If you're the overfunctioner, or if you're the underfunctioner. So in other words, if to use the silly language of the parable, if you're the tennis person, like how do you actually get out of that? Like how do you get out of the block? Or if you're the wife who doesn't want to play tennis, how do you get out of the block? How do we get out of that stuckness when we're in a similar relationship? Yeah.
Communicate.
Communicate? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Step away. Yep. Yep.
I think you have to step out of the whole situation and look at it from a totally unbiased situation on how you feel and how they feel, and validate that they have a right to feel the way they feel, you have a right to feel the way you feel, but then you have to find a common ground that you both can live under.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's facing some of your own inadequacies, which is really hard to hear.
Yeah.
And own up to what you are, whether you're the underachiever or the overachiever. You've got to find a common balance to make that relationship work and acknowledge that both sides are valid.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
For the overachiever especially.
Yeah. Yeah. Others, lots of hands. Up front, James? How do you get unblocked from a situation like this?
I almost think this is sometimes one of the situations where it's difficult to, when you're in the situation yourself, to be able to see the full picture. And it's almost like if you want to get out of it, sometimes you need to get some help. Go talk to somebody who can see both sides of it and give you more intuition. But that's just me.
Yeah. If you want to get your kid to make up your kid's bed, how do you do that? Like how do you, like a kid who does not want to make up their bed, how do you convince a kid to make up their bed, right? I know that's a simple thing, but part of it is as long as mom or dad is making up their kid's bed, why would the kid ever make up their own bed? Like no matter how much you yell and scream at a kid, if they come home from school and their bed is made, why would they ever make it up in the morning, right? In some ways, we got to stop making it up, and we got to figure out a way for the stop making up the bed to become an issue for the kid. And if it's never an issue, then either you've got to just make up the bed and get over it, or you've got to live with the bed being unmade, right? Yeah. So let's move on. And the reason I chose this order, we're actually going to go backwards in the book, but the reason I chose this order is that I think the first fable with the tennis obscures how deadly serious these issues can become. Because usually the issue isn't my husband wants me to go hunting with him or my wife wants me to play tennis with her. Usually the issue is far more critical than that. So let's read a different fable, this one about parents and children, and it's called Soaring. And let me pull that up and then we'll read it. And again, I'll ask for two volunteers. Two volunteers to read. Who would volunteer to read this for us? Thank you. Lark, number one, and who will be number two? Who will be volunteer number two? Dean, one after the other. There we go. Thank you.
Soaring. Mr. and Mrs. Bird had successfully launched 9 fledglings. Each had been hatched with no problems and grown to pre-flight performance with few complications. At the moment of push-out, each had eagerly walked out on the ledge of the tree hole in which their nest had been sheltered and, as their parents helped them clear the rim, spontaneously fluttered its wings in the most natural way. None seemed to need any special tutoring or coaching. All jumped out without any stalling whatsoever, fell a little, flapped a little, dipped, and flew. Now Mr. and Mrs. Bird were ready to leave the nest themselves. It had been home a long time. Both were eager to spend their remaining years alone together, satisfied they had contributed to the survival and the evolution of the species. They had done 9 times before they led baby to the entrance of the shelter without too much thought
Let's try that one instead.
about it or concern. They gently pushed him out. Baby Bird at first fell a few feet just like his siblings before him and then just kept on falling. In fact, he went into an immediate nosedive, tail to the sky. The birds were alarmed. Mr. Bird could not believe what he was seeing. "Flap your wings," cried Mrs. Bird. "Pick your head up," shouted Mr. Bird. "Fly, fly," they both echoed. But baby bird, nose to the ground, did not move a muscle, nor did he seem to show fear. He did not call back, but just kept repeating to himself, "I'll be damned if I show fear." He did not call, "I'm going to flap my wings just 'cause they want me to." Further and further, his little body plummeted straight down like some plumb line following a lead weight. "Loosen your feathers," cried his mother. "Watch out," screamed his father. Frantically, they looked at each other. Then, as they both had the same idea at once, each swooped down on their offspring from opposite sides and caught him before he was halfway down. They gently landed, regained their strength, and flew him back to the nest, chirping soothing noises all the way. "There, there, don't be scared," or "Next time it'll be easier," or "You just have to get some confidence," or "We'll try again tomorrow, will be better." But baby bird did not respond. He just kept thinking to himself, even more determinedly than before, "I'll be damned if I'm going to flap my wings just 'cause they want me to." The next morning, Mama and Papa Bird tried again, this time a bit more anxious as a result of the previous day's experience. They went out of their way to comfort baby bird, pointed out that it would be all right once he learned, and tried to raise his confidence by explaining how easily his brothers and sisters had done it before him. Mrs. Bird explained how to glide if he became tired, and Mr. Bird showed him how to flex his muscles more trimly. Then carefully they set him on the rim of the hole again, and after a moment's hesitation, pushed. Baby bird went into a tumble. "Fly," cried Mrs. Bird with far more anxiety than before. "Move your wings," her mate followed. "Your wings, your wings." But nothing his parents said had any effect on his attitude whatsoever. He just kept plummeting and thinking, "I'll be damned if I'm going to flap my wings just 'cause they want me to." So once again, Mr. and Mrs. Bird zoomed down from their perch, gently nestled themselves beneath his fall, decelerated slowly to the ground, and after a brief rest, carried him back to the nest once more. The next day it was the same, and the day after that the same again. Days became weeks, and weeks became months. Soon the cold weather was approaching, and likewise the winter of their lives. Mama and Papa Bird were totally perplexed. What was wrong? They had never had any trouble with their previous children. What made matters worse was baby Bird's refusal to help himself. He would not explain, refused to show any gratitude, and, if anything, became more belligerent in proportion to their concern. The situation was even beginning to affect their own relationship. More than ever before, they found that if chirping at baby bird did not help, the resulting frustration found them chirping at each other.
Part two.
Then one morning, baby bird awoke. He heard nothing. Usually he could hear his parents somewhere, even if that it was only the ruffling of their feathers. In fact, that is generally what woke him up. Normally, if he slept long enough, he could count on one of them rushing in angrily, or the opposite, coaxing him out with a rewarding morsel. But this morning, there was a peaceful, silent isolation. He tried to outwit them as usual, but nothing happened. Finally, he got himself off his straw and went out of his cubicle. He chirped. There was no response. They have gone out together? Most unusual. He walked to the edge of the opening to see if he could find them outside. It was a particularly beautiful day, and the sky was seductively calling him. He repressed the urge quickly, however, and ducked back in. They were nowhere to be seen. He decided to go back to bed and wait, but he could not sleep. He found himself anxious, fidgety. In the past, he had always found his parents chirping a bother. He almost longed for it now. Somehow those chirps and pokes had enabled him to avoid his destiny instead of facing it. He was beginning to realize that much as he was annoyed by their calls, they managed in some way he could not comprehend to take the discomfort out of his indolence. He became angry. How dare they? Don't they understand that I can't make it alone? Don't they care? Finally, I'll show them. He went to the opening again. The ground was far away. Mama and Papa Bird had always made sure to put their nest high in a tree where it could be so much more secure. He peered out over the edge of the hole in the bark. A trickle of fear ran through his otherwise cold-blooded body, but he quickly stopped it as he always did with rage. All the better. They'll never know what happened, and if they do find out, maybe even come to see what's left, then they'll know, really know. He resisted an urge to look around and dove out. He began tumbling as before, end over end, and he felt some loss of control. Then he stopped tumbling and angled straight for the earth below. He had hopes for a rapid descent and began to brace himself, eagerly for the triumphal splat. When he was a little more than halfway down, however, further down than he had ever fallen before, something else unaccountable happened. Both of his wings simultaneously, and through no fault of his, pulled away from his body. He tried to tuck them back in, but air resistance prevented it. Worse, they proceeded slowly to span out further on both sides until they were fully extended. The immediate effect, of course, was to pull Baby Bird out of his nosedive. More, however, occurred than that. As his body gradually inclined upwards, his whole being felt an urge he had never sensed before. Caught in the flow of a gentle air current, he rose rapidly, higher toward the clouds, and for perhaps only the second time in his life, he looked at the sky. The current carried him gracefully in a soft, elongated, parabolic curve, which, after it had borne him to its zenith, began to descend inadvertently again, as if, though no fault of his, he unwittingly, perhaps one could say instinctively, raised and lowered his wings. Instantly his body stopped its short descent, and he glided upwards again. He lowered and raised his wings once more, and once more his young, properly formed body moved effortlessly up in a graceful, inverted arc. The feeling was new, indescribably new. Riding the crest of his own energy now, he moved his head. Generally, he was prone to look at his toes. He looked at his right, then to his left, and as he tilted his head, found that even this movement affected his whole being, as he swooped up and over a flock of another feather. His parents, totally forgotten for the moment, and without their constant chirping to foul his functioning, he found to his surprise that he was able almost naturally to maintain the minimum velocity needed to prevent stalls. He experimented more. Within no time at all, Little Bird was miles away. Looking around below, he could no longer locate his former home. There were trees everywhere. For a moment he wondered which had been his. Then, with sudden resolve, he flapped his wings again and again, spurting and gliding upward. Out he went in new directions, diving, looping, turning, banking. One more time he remembered his nest, but with no vestige of his previous attitude, oblivious, he soared to the sun.
Thank you. Thank you both. The children who do best in this world are those we make least important to our own salvation. Let me read that again. That's the moral that Friedman identifies for this. The children who do best in this world are those we make least important to our own salvation. So let's ask that first question. Why is it that some fledglings have a harder time leaving the nest than others? Why do some kids have a hard time leaving? Too comfortable? Yep, and some of that sounds like it comes with experience, right? Yeah.
So I did come from a family of 10, so I can relate to the 9. but I think maybe a lot of it has to do to see the success of the other siblings and be intimidated by that.
Sure.
That I can't do as well as they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Parents aren't supposed to have favorites, and we kind of convince ourselves that we don't have favorites. And even though we don't consciously have favorites, we care for our children in different ways. We respond to their needs in different ways, partly because of where we are in our life, where they are in their life, who they are, who we are, and also other factors that are going on, right? Yeah. Yeah, you remember the first time you realized that your parents were people? Where they had needs and feelings too, and it wasn't just about you. Do you remember that? How hard that might have been, how freeing that might have been? Yeah. Why else? Why else do some fledglings have such a hard time leaving the nest? It relates to the next question, which I think is really insightful. How do you think baby bird in the parable winded up thinking that learning to fly was for his parents' benefit? How did the bird get that attitude? I'm not going to flap my wings because they want me to. Why? Yeah, Kristen.
Because they just told him to. There was
Yeah.
never a reason why.
Yeah. Yeah. Who else? Yeah, Alan.
Well, there was also a whole bunch of attention on him jumping out.
Yeah.
I have to wonder if they ignored him fully the way they did the others, it sounded like. I don't think he would have splatted. That's my thought.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. What else? What else? Yeah, Molly.
Well, so for me, the two parables connect in that probably one of the hardest things for me as a mom to do was, particularly with my firstborn, was to let him be who he wanted to be, not continually try to make him who I wanted him to be.
Yeah.
And that has been, I mean, he's 23, and I maybe really let that go about 20. It's just that was, for me as a parent, that was super, super hard. And then I think when you combine that with this constantly saving them and not letting them splat on the ground, I feel like in some ways he didn't have a chance to figure out who he was because I kept trying to make him who I thought he should be. So I felt like there was like a connection there for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Bingo. Bingo. Yeah, for me, I think the reason some fledglings have a hard time leaving the nest is because their prosperity, their flourishing, doesn't come the way that I expect it to. And so I begin to confuse the different path with wrong path, right? And if I start to confuse different path for wrong path, then it's not that long before what I want becomes only what I want and not what's good for them. Like it's a fine line between what's good for them and what's not good for them. There's a reason that you can't rent a car until you're 25, right? And because the brain's not fully functioned. 20-year-olds make really dumb choices. And sometimes, actually, we need to prevent them from splatting. But sometimes we don't, right? And that's finding that balance is so hard. It's so hard. I haven't been a parent before. I've never had a 16-year-old until now, right? I don't know what I'm doing, right? Yeah. What about that fifth question? This is so hard. This is that balance. Is it still willful to try to change another person when that person is acting self-destructively? No. I heard very instinctive no. I see some nodding of yes. Ooh, it's tough, isn't it? Like, if we see a 2-year-old about to stick a fork into an electrical outlet, we stop them, right? We don't wait for them to learn that hard lesson. Like, we don't need them to learn the lesson that way. And yet, if we see a 16-year-old about to stick a fork into the electrical outlet, do we stop them? I don't know. I mean, I see some people say no. I don't know. So who wants to respond to that question more fully? Is it willful to try to change another person when that person is acting self-destructively? Who wants to unpack that? Yes, Elizabeth.
I think if the child or person is of normal intelligence and is old enough to be responsible to make decisions, and if they don't get a chance to fail, some children are never going to figure out how to succeed. And watching your child fail is really, really hard. I've had to do that once before. And letting him fail was the best thing that ever happened to him. And he says now to this day, it was the most important thing that ever happened to him. Yeah. Because he learned who he was, how strong he was, and that he could do it on his own.
Yeah.
But that is really hard to watch as a parent.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you love someone and let them destroy their life, as we would say, right? I mean, yeah. Yeah, James and then Lark. Yeah.
I want to piggyback just a little bit on what she said back there. In software engineering, we have something saying fail fast. You can't design and write a perfect system or raise a perfect child by making everything perfect and specifying every little detail of their lives. The sooner that you let something fail, you learn from it. We all learn from our failures. If you never fail, you never learn.
Fail fast. Fail fast. Yeah. Yeah. And Lark? And then I ask the last question to wrap us up.
Also, going back to what you said, I think we as parents are afraid. We don't like to be disappointed, and it's very hard to get over being disappointed in what your child does. Even though your brain says, oh, they're going to learn from that, but depending on the situation, it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're not going to answer it because we don't have time to answer it, but I want you to think about it. Question number 6. If Baby Bird's parents had let him go on the first try, would the results have been the same or different? Which is to ask, can we as parents in this fable or in other relationships, can we recognize when it's our contribution that is resulting in the underperformance or the underflourishing of our children? Like, are we able to see that we're the problem? Hi, I'm the problem. Are we able to see that? Or is it only frustration that makes us finally just throw up our hands and leave? That it happens? Like, how do we get to that point? Just think about that. And the last question I want to ask is number 9. I think it's so insightful. Can you think of any books on raising children that try to get parents to defocus their child? Like, just think of what does it mean to encourage a new parent to care less about their child as a way of caring for their child? What a radical way. So anyway, you can tell these fables are weird and kind of fun and a little dangerous. But I hope you've enjoyed the class. Next week, we're going to look at our last week. We're going to look at bonds and binds, the things that imprison us and trap us, and we'll see how we can perhaps, with a little help, unstick it. Thank you all for being here, and I hope to see you next week.